Hello, and welcome to another episode of Xact Hacks brought to you by Actionable Insights. My name is Seth Harrison, and today I want to talk about labor minimums. Labor minimums can be somewhat of a touchy subject. From the contractors we work with, we hear all the time, adjusters tell me I won't pay for labor minimums, take them out. And adjusters that we work with have given us some perspective as to why that is their directive to the contractors that they work with at times. Labor minimums were formerly known as base service charges, which had some kind of material labor component to provide concessions for trades where, let's say plumber is the example I'm going to use today. You needed a plumber to come out for one thing. They're going to charge you some kind of 3-hour minimum. So base service charges were designed to provide concessions for those material labor costs of getting them out there and the minimums associated with it. Well, unfortunately, the base service charges were so sophisticated that most of the market didn't really understand them, including myself. So they simplified it and turned it into labor minimums. Labor minimums are designed to add up all the labor hours of all the line items in your estimate, and if you have not hit the labor minimum number for that trade, in plumbing for example, it's 2.5 plumbing hours, then it will provide additional concessions in the form of a labor minimum at the end of your estimate. To give you an idea what I'm talking about, in my bathroom here, I put in PLM stop, angle stop. We're going to replace an angle stop, and there's a labor and material component price associated with that activity. And if I go over here to labor minimums, you can see, first of all, they automatically show up. If there is a category that has a labor minimum associated with it, it's going to be triggered here, and it's always going to come turned on. It's going to be applied. So it's saying that the base amount is 2.5 hours for the plumbing labor minimum, and it's saying that that's $287.53 for the plumbing, for 2.5 hours of plumbing labor. You have an amount associated with this line item here, but in order to hit your plumbing labor minimum, we're going to add additional $261.97 at the bottom of your estimate. Let's see if I can do this real quick and show you kind of what that would look like in this estimate, which will highlight one thing I'm going to talk about later. So here we have our line item, we're replacing the angle stop, and then labor minimums applied, plumbing labor minimum. It's just right there, that's it. Of note, and I'll touch on this in more detail later, I can't add an F9 note here, I can't change anything. I have no way to justify or explain why a labor minimum might be necessary on this loss. So, labor minimums are keeping track of all the labor hours for that specific category code. I'm going to add another line item here. So, I'm going to take a clawfoot tub and change it to replace, just so I'm consistent here. And you can see that that's a large number. I've added a lot of money. When I go to the labor minimums, it's now 0. It's saying I've covered in these 2 line items, there's more than 2.5 hours of plumbing labor included in those line items. Therefore, a labor minimum is not necessary. And even if I leave this applied with a $0 amount, it's not going to show up as a labor minimum. Actionable Insights best practice, which is a little bit different than Xactimate certified training best practice, is to turn off all your labor minimums for one very specific reason. If I needed a plumbing labor minimum on this job, if I was going to have a plumbing labor plumber come out for one activity to replace an angle stop, in our eyes, in our experience, and what we teach and what we talk to adjusters about, is there's a better way to do that than just having the automatic labor minimum trigger at the end. I would take this and I would add the PLM MN line item, plumbing labor minimum, to the room that the labor minimum actually applies to. So this is helping add to my story and showing that I do need a plumbing labor minimum on this job and I need it to happen in this particular room. Now the next level of sophistication is to actually change the activity code on the angle stop to material only. So now I'm explaining in these 2 line items, and I would have F9 notes with both of them that said this is for the materials for this activity, this is for the labor associated with having a plumber coming on site in order to perform this one activity. So now I'm saying I'm charging for the materials of the angle stop, and I am charging for the plumbing labor hour minimum in order to have the plumber visit our site and perform this one activity that is necessary. One note I'd like to touch on this. More often than not, only one labor minimum is necessary. So if I were to have drywall associated with 3 rooms next to each other, and let's say the middle room, the living room, has the most amount of drywall work that requires a labor minimum in order to be applied, then I'm going to put the labor minimum in that living room, and I'm going to add an F9 note that says This is applicable for the drywall labor minimum required for the living room and the 2 conjoining rooms. Therefore, I'm not double or triple dipping labor minimums in every room in that context. So when I submit an estimate that has material and then a plumbing labor minimum and explaining with F9 notes both of those concepts, it's now in the estimate. I can add an F9 note, I can explain it. It's so important to be telling the story with our estimates to justify and explain why all these activities are necessary to perform on this loss. One thing I wanted to touch on with labor minimums. Not every category has a labor minimum. Electrician has a labor minimum. And drywall has a labor minimum. And you can find in the, and you can see it, they were triggered and applied here. Obviously there's $0 amounts here because I've already put the labor minimum in there, so it's already accommodating for it. Best practice, turn them off. You can, in the estimate items, come here to the replace price and take a look and find out exactly how many hours are associated with that plumbing labor, or with that labor minimum for that trade. But not every category code has a labor minimum. Electrical code is all electrical work. So there's an electrician labor price, and that can account for the electrical labor needed for that job. Drywall has one drywall code. But for example, CPS. CPS does not have, let me cancel real quick. CPS does not have an MN code. CPS category code has 3 different labor trades that are associated with it: LBR, CLN, and CLN-S. Same thing with appliance. Appliance does not have a labor minimum code. Some appliances are gas, some are electric, and some require the plumbing labor, some require electrical labor. So it's almost impossible for Xactimate to produce an appliance minimum when it depends on what appliance you're working with and the trade associated with that appliance. So when a labor minimum is available, you can find it by typing in the category code here. Let's do PNT because I just did dry. And then you would have MN as the painting labor minimum. This way, in my estimate, now that I've turned off labor minimums in a way that I can't justify them, I can't explain them, they're at the end of the estimate and seem somewhat like an afterthought. And if you've got a really long estimate, maybe you have a labor minimum that's applicable, but it was in the second room you talked about, and 30 rooms later, the adjuster that's reviewing your estimate as a contractor no longer has any idea of where that labor minimum applied to, and you can't add an F9 note to it. So our best practice is to turn them off here in the labor minimum section. And then if you do need a labor minimum when it is applicable, then you would put it in the room that it goes with and add F9 notes to explain everything. In the example we talked about here, we took it to another level and actually changed this to materials to say that we need the materials for the angle stomp, and then I'm charging for the plumbing labor minimum to have the plumber come out and provide the labor required to perform the plumbing activities on this job. I hope you enjoyed. Labor minimums, like I said, can be a sensitive, touchy topic, and when not sure how to apply them or how to justify them. So hopefully this provides some guidance to contractors and adjusters as to the best way that labor minimums can be applied, explained, justified, and eventually approved. Hope you enjoyed. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next Thursday.